Welcome to Carmendale Fernandez, United States Extemporaneous Speaking, presented by the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Let's meet our esteemed panel of judges. A six-diamond coach with over 20 years of experience and representing your sponsor from the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, Christine Adams. The Director of Individual Events at San Diego State University and a collegiate poetry and oratory finalist, Haley Stone. Head coach with over 7 years of experience in the activity from Thornwood High School in Illinois, Stephen Ihejerica. He's a diamond coach from Morristown East High School in Tennessee, Gabrielle Wexler. Current competitor at George Mason University and a three-time AFA and NFA national champion in Extemp and Impromptu, Gus Lance. A four-time diamond coach and a coach of a national champion, Todd Schnucke. Diamond coach and Hoosier Heartland District Committee member, recent inductee into the Indiana Hall of Fame for speech and debate coaches, Gary Peters. A national champion coach with 6 diamonds, Gay Janis. A 2-diamond coach who has coached multiple national and state finalists from Florida, Jennifer Moore. A 3-diamond coach, a member of your NSDA Board of Directors, and the inaugural Educator of the Year for the NSDA, Renee Motter. A 2-diamond coach from Taipei American School. He has coached several national champions and finalists across multiple events. He is also a member of the PF Wording Committee and founder of ISD, Chase Williams. A judging veteran with over 4 years of experience from Bardstown High School in Kentucky, Ashley Faulkner. 25 years of experience, a 5-diamond coach, coach of multiple national champions from Moorhead High School in Minnesota, Rebecca Meyer Larson. A 3-diamond coach, and not only a member of your host committee, but the one who was majorly responsible for all those volunteers that you had all week long at every one of those schools. Let's hear it for Richard Glover. A 4-diamond coach and the chair of the Sunflower District, coach of the 2015 national champion and 2016 runner-up in oratory, member of the Kansas Speech Communication Association Hall of Fame, James Harris. And now, I would like to introduce the chair of United States Extemp, Carolyn Cook.
Good morning. Welcome to the final round of United States Extemporaneous Speaking. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the rest of the TAB staff for USX this week. This event could not happen without their generous donation of time. Thank you, Thomas Beck from New York, Sheila Berselli from Nevada, Bill Prater from Ohio, and Robert Shepard from Texas. Prep room coordinators, directed by Pam McComas and Joe Ball of Kansas, and our leaders, Gail Nicholas from South Carolina and Matt Good from Missouri. From U.S. News to CNN to the Brookings Institute, we have become a media indulgent society. Our world is changing constantly, and to be an informed society is to be one that will not repeat its past. We started the week with 282 phenomenal speakers, and now I'm pleased to present the final 6, a brilliant group who inspire so much hope for our future. Our first speaker today is code 5684, speaking on the topic, how would a drop in housing prices affect consumer confidence? Again, how would a drop in housing prices affect consumer confidence?
Rebecca Bush joined the housing market in January of 2020. She was ready for a place to call her home, to make a house truly a home. She thought that she would be on the market for a few months, maybe 5 or 6 at the most. But as NPR explains, on April 6th of this year, she ended up being on the market for 2 years, because just 2 months after she started, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, forcing us all back into our homes and showing exactly why a home is important. The New York Times explains on January 12th of 2023 that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, Americans suddenly realized the value of home ownership, combined to their homes for years on end. As soon as they got out, they started bidding up the price of real estate. The price of homes jumped by 14%, and over the last few years, the prices have only gone up and up and up. So, considering that Americans seem to be betting on this trend heavily, and with hundreds of millions of their own dollars, it's important to understand just what would happen if they were wrong. If Americans, who are putting everything that they have into this hope, lose it just like that. And ask today's question: how would a drop in housing prices affect consumer confidence? And unfortunately, the answer is clear. It would shatter Americans' confidence because it would play on pre-existing fears. First, because it would damage Americans' largest investment. Second, because it would spark fears of another round of layoffs. And third and finally, because it could push Americans to the edge of bankruptcy. Every time that Rebecca came in to bid on a house, she always thought she had a good offer. She thought that her dream was just in reach. And then somebody else came in with $50,000 or $60,000 or $70,000 more because they thought the house was worth it. But what if it wasn't? What if those $50,000 were gone? So the first way that we can see that a drop in housing prices would decimate Americans' consumer confidence is because it would tarnish their largest investment. CNBC explains to us just yesterday that as our country is recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, we begin investing more and more in the stock market. Dow Jones this year, a tracker of the American stock market, is up 400 points. And this speech is coming off a 6-day increase, where Americans have invested more and more every day and bid the price higher and higher. It's clear that Americans are taking risks with their investments, but they've already taken the biggest risk of all. Because as Money Magazine explains, on April 7th of 2023, a house is the largest investment most Americans will ever make, with most houses costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, with you paying tens of thousands in mortgages building equity. Suddenly, the confidence that has led Americans to invest in their stock market might just be gone, because even if those investments are doing well, they might not even have a roof over their heads, because the value of their house, which for Rebecca and millions of other Americans is everything, would just be gone. COVID-19 was a tumultuous time for Rebecca. She was forced into her house. She didn't know what she was going to do. She didn't know if she would keep her job. So the second way that we can see a crash in housing prices would decimate consumer confidence is because it would spark fears of a second wave of layoffs. The Wall Street Journal explains on May 30th of 2023 that over the last year, we've seen hundreds of thousands of Americans laid off, most of them in sectors like tech and finance, but those sectors don't stand alone. We've seen tens of thousands of layoffs in companies around the country in everything from construction to essential support services, and Americans are worried if they've lost their jobs, but they're also worried that they could lose their jobs in the future. And Forbes magazine explains on January 4th of 2023 that a crash in housing prices would spark that fear into overdrive. In the last 4 out of 5 major recessions in the United States, it was started by a drop in housing prices. Americans will see this, not just of a sign of their houses, but their economy at large. Because they're not just worried about a house and a roof over their heads, but about being able to put food on the table for their families. Rebecca believes that she's a fairly fiscally financial individual. We'd all like to believe it, that we're safe, that we're okay. And largely that's true, right up until we're not. So the third way that we can see that a crash in housing prices would decimate consumer confidence is because it could push Americans to the brink of bankruptcy. The Atlantic explains on April 19th of 2023 that in our current housing market, 2008 looms large over our heads, a recession, a global depression that was caused by housing prices crashing, but American consumers holding the bag. Well, it's true that many banks did go under. Americans saw their entire values wiped away, saw themselves go bankrupt. And as The Guardian explains just 2 days ago, that could happen today. Because with mortgage prices, the amount of money that you pay on your house every year at an all-time high, we are at risk of exactly what happened in 2008. When you were paying more on your home than your home is worth, that is what drives Americans to lose their home, to declare bankruptcy, to lose everything that they have. And if that's not enough panic to put Americans into overdrive, saving and skimping and pulling money out of the stock market, then nothing is. But considering that almost certainly if Americans feel that their finances are going underwater, they will pull everything out. They will do what they need to save their families. It's crucial that we once again ask today's question. How would a drop in housing prices affect consumer confidence? And once again, it's clear. It would absolutely decimate it by playing on already existing fears. First, because it would tarnish America's largest investment. Second, because it could spark fears of a second round of layoffs. And third, because it could push Americans to the brink of bankruptcy. And so, while Rebecca Bush is still on the market for a house, still desperately trying to find something that she can call a home, perhaps it's good that housing markets haven't crashed yet. But as she, and some of us in this room, prepare to put hundreds of thousands or millions down on a property, it's important that we be careful, because the trend that we see today could turn around next week.
Our first speaker will be cross-examined by our sixth speaker, code 5573.
Congratulations on a great speech.
Thank you.
I just have a few questions.
Of course.
Considering that housing prices would decrease in the United States under your question, wouldn't that make homes more affordable and thus millions of vulnerable Americans who in the past couldn't access the homes finally have a roof over their heads?
Sure, but the question isn't what macroeconomic trends are a good thing for the country, for specific groups of people. It's how would this macroeconomic trend impact consumer confidence? And as I explained in my 3 points, it would decimate how Americans think about their economy at large.
So if more Americans can actually buy homes, you're saying that wouldn't increase consumer confidence?
Look at what happened in 2008. Housing prices crashed, but more Americans weren't in their homes. Sure, in theory, it becomes more affordable, but when you have hundreds of thousands or millions of people being declaring bankruptcy, being foreclosed on, being pushed out of their homes, not only is that not a good thing in the question that wasn't asked, but it also decimates our confidence in this question.
Okay, let's move on to the technicalities of your first point. If we actually see lower housing prices in the United States, would that not decrease mortgage costs?
Perhaps, but mortgage costs right now are very high. And so even if Americans could refinance, as I explained in my third point, the fact that you would see a dramatic decrease in housing prices would likely mean, as in 2008, that Americans are paying more than their house is worth, which is exactly what caused the bankruptcy then and now.
So if mortgage costs go down, wouldn't that mean that current homeowners actually have the ability to keep their largest investment?
I mean, some homeowners, if the situation gets worse enough, as I mentioned in my third point, will get foreclosed on, will declare bankruptcy. But even if it's not that bad, even if they get to keep their homes, that's not the standard this question is dealing with. If Americans who are already taking massive risks in the stock market over this year see their largest investment go down, sure, maybe they'll still be able to live in their homes, though maybe not, but they will certainly be running to the stock market to take their money out and to consolidate risk.
So if more people can keep their homes and more people can buy homes, who exactly is consumer confidence decreasing for?
Consumer confidence is decreasing for everyone. It's decreasing for the Americans that are worried about declaring bankruptcy. It's decreasing for the Americans who are worried about their investments. It's decreasing for every American in this room that has a job.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our second speaker today is code 5675, speaking on the topic, what will be the defining issue of the next presidential election? Again, what will be the defining issue of the next presidential election?
I like to consider myself a little bit of a politician. In fact, not to brag or anything, but in the third grade, I decided to run for class president. And for those of you out there who think third graders can't be mean, let me just tell you, they can. I was called a crybaby for losing my tooth, and needless to say, I dropped out of the race. And I wouldn't survive a day in American politics. Because as The Hill explains in an article published on March 23rd of this year, titled 5 Reasons to Dread the 2024 Election, it's going to be a brutal one, especially with issues over the past year plaguing things such as social issues and political issues involving book bans and transgender rights. Both parties have their work cut out for them when it turns to tackling critical issues in the US election. But considering that the 2024 election will not only affect millions of Americans, but could also change the fate of both the Democratic and Republican Party, it becomes essential to ask today's question. What will be the defining issue of the next presidential election? And the answer is simple, the economy, because of 3 key reasons. First, because it's the least polarizing focal point. Second, because of the new debt ceiling deal. And finally, because it affects minorities on both sides of the aisle. Now, US politics is filled with drama. But when you let a reality TV show star become your president, what else can you expect? However, when it comes to this election, politicians are going to be focusing on the least polarizing issue. And that's why the economy is going to be the focal point. Because as an article by NPR explains on March 23rd of this year, when it comes to Republicans, they risk being branded as extremists by focusing on social issues such as, once again, transgender rights and book bannings. And for Democrats, they risk losing their more conservative support if they tackle issues such as crime and banning TikTok. When it comes to that one, let me be the one to say, please don't do it. However, when it comes to the economy, this not only remains a focal point that isn't as polarizing for both sides of the aisle, but as the Brookings Institution explains on November 1st of this year, is something that most Americans care about, In fact, 85% of Americans report the economy being their #1 contender when it comes to presidential elections. And so in the 2024 election, both Democrats and Republicans are going to focus on this issue because they know that not only will it be the least polarizing when it comes to gaining support from their normal voter base, but that most Americans across the country support the economy. Now, it's said that those in Congress on Capitol Hill don't know how to party. However, while they may not know how to raise the roof, they certainly know how to raise the debt ceiling. And that's the second reason why the economy is going to be the focal point for the 2024 election. In fact, an article published by the New York Times explains on June 2nd of this year that the new debt ceiling deal passed by Congress basically suspends the United States federal debt limit for 2 more years. And what it did was cut support on major focal points for the Democratic Party, so things such as Social Security and federal aid. But it also presented a major win for the Republican Party because it increased defense spending by over 1%. And while that may not sound like a lot, when we're talking about billions of US dollars, it certainly is. In fact, because the economy is going to be the focal point of the next election, it directly relates to the debt ceiling. Democrats are going to have to show their voters why the cuts on federal spending relating to aid aren't going to affect them in the next election and how they're going to bounce back from that. And Republicans are going to focus on the wins that they took away. As NBC explains, on June 7th of this year, especially for the Republican Party, facing such a hard year after being branded as extremists, the wins that they got through the debt ceiling deal, focusing on the economy in terms of defense spending, will be a major win that they're going to focus on in the next election. Now, my parents, like most immigrants to this country, came in search of the American dream. But it's because that very American dream is being threatened for millions of minorities across the country that the economy is going to be the focal point of the next election, because it affects minorities on both sides of the aisle. In fact, an article published by NPR explains just last month that one of the focal points of the next US elections has to be the economy. Because when we look at rural Americans, who typically tend to support Republicans, they face some of the worst drawbacks of inflation rates over the past couple of years. And it's not just rural Americans, but the main groups that the Democratic Party gets their support from, namely African American minorities and Hispanic American minorities, have faced the same effects. In fact, Harvard University explains on August 8th of last year that when the economy affects minorities, specifically those that typically tend to associate with either the Democratic or Republican Party, they have no choice but to address that issue when it comes to elections, because that's what's important to a large base of their voters, specifically those that are disadvantaged. In fact, NBC in June of last year describes the story of Amy Korn, the owner of a food center in my hometown of Houston, as she describes how hundreds of thousands of disadvantaged minorities, both rural Americans and Hispanic and African Americans, are pouring into food centers because they cannot afford basic necessities after inflation rates over the past couple of years. And this kind of effect on minorities that the economy is having is exactly why both parties are going to be focusing on the economy in the next election, because they know that not only does it affect voters on both sides of the aisle, but that it's a critical issue when it comes to addressing equality in America. From Main Street to Wall Street, the economy remains a way for most Americans to finally achieve the American dream. And it's for the protection of that very American dream that we ask today's question. What will be the defining point of the next presidential election? And the answer is simple: the economy. Because first, it's the least polarizing focal point. Second, because of the new debt ceiling deal. And finally, because it affects minorities on both sides of the aisle. While I may not be going into politics anytime soon, the United States government knows exactly what it needs to do. Whether it comes to Democrats or Republicans, the economy is the only way to win.
Our second speaker will be cross-examined by our first speaker, Code 5684.
First of all, congratulations on making it to finals and a great speech. As always, I just have a few questions. So first, isn't it true that the most likely candidates to win the Republican primary are Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump?
Yes, that is true.
And isn't it true that Ron DeSantis is mostly running on an anti-woke, Florida is where woke goes to die campaign, and Donald Trump is running on a sort of 2016 grievance comeback?
While that may be true, when it comes to the election, both parties aren't going to want to lose support on either sides of the aisle by being too extremist in their campaign. While this may be the campaign they're running on for primaries, because that's what they know their party will vote for, in the actual election, they need to appeal to Americans, not just their own party. And that's why the economy is going to be the focal point.
But didn't Ron DeSantis run in the general election on social policies, on the culture war, on getting back at companies like Disney that he eventually did once he was in office?
While he may have done that to be elected as Florida's governor, when it comes to the actual United States presidential election, which is what the question is asking, they're going to focus on the economy, which impacts every single American. Not just Americans in Florida, not just Americans in New York, but Americans across America.
Okay, so let's look at the presidential election. Didn't Donald Trump run in 2016 on building the wall, and in 2020 on keeping America great, focusing squarely on social policies?
Let's look at 2020. How did that turn out for Donald Trump? It didn't work, and that's why the economy is going to be the focus.
So is your case dependent on Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis doing the most rational thing to win the presidential election?
Well, while they haven't done the most rational thing in the past, we're focusing on the Republican Party, not just two candidates who may be the most extremes of the party. If the Republican Party wants any chance of surviving in the future, they're going to go with more rational candidates, not just reality TV show stars.
Is there any other candidate in the party that has a chance of winning the primary?
Well, right now, we don't know the answer to that. As we get closer to November, the Republican Party as a whole needs to focus on the economy. The question asks, what's going to be the defining issue? The defining issue must be the economy for both parties to have a solid chance to win the election.
Good job.
Thank you.
Our third speaker today is code 5579, speaking on the topic, do relaxed child labor laws expand or threaten the rights of minors? Again, do relaxed child labor laws expand or threaten the rights of minors?
Back in 2016, when former President Donald Trump was introducing himself to the nation, he told CNN that, and I quote, he was really smart because he went to the Wharton School of Business. Whether or not he's really smart, I'll leave that up for you guys to decide. But one thing is true, he did go to the Wharton School of Business, and they don't let just anybody in. Unfortunately, though, for kids across the country, their dreams of going to the Wharton School of Business are being stolen from them. That's because, according to NPR, in an article that they published on February 26th of 2023, they explain that child labor violations are at an all-time high in the United States of America in the 21st century, and states across the nation are relaxing their child labor laws. It's a problem that brings us to ask today's question, which is simply, do relaxed child labor laws expand or threaten the rights of minors? The answer is undoubtedly that the rights of minors are being threatened, and we'll talk about how this is true in three separate ways. First, we'll focus on education. Secondly, on health outcomes, and third, on social mobility. But first, let's start on the idea that children need to be in the classroom. And I think that for the teachers in the audience, this makes a lot of sense. But the unfortunate reality of the situation is summarized by the European Union. They explain that when children, instead of being in the classroom, instead go to work under the age of 14, they have worse educational outcomes. It makes a lot of sense. because instead of spending their time studying, they're spending their time working. That's why the EU corroborates child labor with higher dropout rates, worse classroom performance, and worse coping abilities later in life when it comes to stress. Dropout rates in particular are especially detrimental because, according to the APA, or the American Psychiatric Association, back in 2019, they link higher dropout rates to higher involvement in crime, drug activities, and less chance of you to ever earn a living wage in your life. It's because of these trends that children, when they're removed from the classroom, are robbed of opportunities in their future. So, when we're looking at the rights of children, their right is to remain in the classroom, but child labor is taking that out of the opportunity for them. And as a result, when we're returning to today's question, our answer is consistent. Children, in their rights, should be remaining in the classroom rather than in the workforce, meaning that absolutely, child labor is threatening the rights of minors. But secondly, let's look at health outcomes, because across the United States of America, there's been a little bit of a trend going on. Back in 2020, for instance, Senator Bernie Sanders and now President Joe Biden must have been filming a Wendy's commercial, because an interaction that they had about healthcare was nothing other than 100% real beef. Bernie thinks that we should expand the healthcare system, and he's absolutely right. Georgetown corroborates that back in 2021, there are more than 4.2 million children who don't have access to healthcare, whether that's because they're uninsured or they can't afford it. The problem is even worse in rural areas, and people of color are disproportionately affected. However, it's even worse when you throw child labor into the mix, because these children who already can't access healthcare are more likely to need it. That's why, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, they explain that as soon as you have children working under the age of 14, they're more likely to get injured, A, but B, later in life, they're also more likely to have net worse health outcomes. The mental stress that it takes on children is something that will catch up to them later on. But that's why, according to an ABC News article, it's even worse, because they explain that worse health outcomes in your childhood contribute to a greater chance of you losing your job once you're employed. The reality of the situation is, for millions of Americans, the only way they have healthcare is through their job. So, children right now don't have healthcare, and if they get a job that provides it, they're more likely to lose it because child labor is threatening their rights. So in returning to today's question at the top, our answer is the same. Child labor is definitely threatening the rights of minors in the United States of America. But finally, let's focus in on the last piece of this puzzle, which is social mobility, i.e. the American dream. Now, every single one of us was raised with the idea that if we do enough, if we work hard and pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, we'll be able to make it in our own right. And it's great on paper. But unfortunately, child labor is changing that trend. That's because, according to a report by the European Union, they explain that child labor is intrinsically linked to poverty. Basically, if your family is impoverished, you're more likely to go work in the first place, because you feel that those wages are necessary to support your family. It makes a lot of sense. But unfortunately, that's not actually what pans out once children show up to work in the first place. The Washington Post explains, in an article that they published in April of 2022, that child labor allows for employers to reduce wages, not only for children, but for all workers. And keep in mind that most degrees in the United States of America are a prerequisite for jobs in the first place. We already talked about the fact that 14-year-olds can't go to Wharton just yet. They don't have an MBA. But when they do show up to work, the workers that do have an MBA are able to have less wages available for them because owners are cutting costs. By lowering wages, not only for children, but also for other workers, we create a downward spiral that will continue. But specifically returning to minors for a second, it's really important to remember that a majority of those minors who are working in the first place are from the lower classes. They're looking to provide for their families, but they're not getting paid as good a wage as they would otherwise get. That's why, according to The Guardian, they explain that child workers who start working under the age of 14 earn 2 times less in their lifetimes than people who wait to get a college degree, clearly illustrating to us that social mobility is decreased as child labor expands. So, in returning to today's question, our answer is yet again the same. Children are being harmed. Their rights are being threatened as child labor expands. But let's take a step back. Because in today's speech, we answered ourselves the question, does the relaxation of child labor laws expand or threaten the rights of minors? And we concluded that minors are under attack because of the three reasons we talked about. First, their education is harmed. Second, their health is too. And finally, their ability to actually move upwards in society is also detrimented. So, while former President Donald Trump at least thinks that he is really, 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 really smart, it looks like the really, 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 really smart thing for us to do is not relax child labor laws, but rather stop the expansion of them.
Our third speaker today, our second speaker. Our third speaker will be cross-examined by our second speaker, 5675.
First off, congratulations on finals and a great speech. So first, I just have an overarching question for you. Like you described, there are millions of children across America living in poverty, and the expansion of these child labor laws has allowed a lot of them to go to work and get themselves out of this poverty, or at least start to begin to. By threatening the expansion of these child labor laws, aren't we restricting the ability of these children to get themselves out of a cycle of poverty?
No, that's a false equivalency. What I argue in my third point is that social mobility is actually hurt. These children will have better outcomes when it comes to the amount of money they're able to earn later in life, as that Guardian article explained, if they go and get the proper education that prerequisites a lot of those jobs. It's really important when we're talking about breaking the cycle of poverty that we get children who are in poverty into high-paying jobs that are stable and have good benefits for their family members too. So if a children is going to work at a low-paying job for below average wages, they're never going to get to the point where they're able to actually get out of poverty.
But if we have these children living in poverty, how can they get to the next stage without having any money? Would you rather have these children go hungry while we wait for them to get a master's degree?
That's not what I'm saying at all. The simple answer is one word, and it's my second point: education. That's because of the fact that education is the only way for children to actually get up when it comes to social mobility. And in terms of them going hungry, I think the government can do more to expand food programs. But remember, that's not the topic. When we're talking about the rights of minors, they absolutely need to be in the classroom learning. That is a right that should not be taken away from them.
Unfortunately, you're thinking of an ideal world, and we don't live in an ideal world. These children aren't able to get an education if they have no money to receive that education in the first place. How does your point on education solve that if they aren't able to get an education without being able to go to work?
I would say that it's extremely painful for you to say that children can't get an education. They can get an education. The education system sure needs a little bit of reworking, but it's still the best possible way for us to improve social mobility when it comes to the opportunities that these children have to earn high-paying jobs with good benefits to lift themselves out of poverty.
Thank you, and congratulations again on a great speech.
You kinda scared yourself, you turn and run. But if you have a change of heart, Ricky, don't lose that number.
Our fourth speaker today is Code 5571, speaking on the topic, will House Republican obstruction cost them their majority? Again, will House Republican obstruction cost them their majority?
In January, Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy suffered for weeks through a divided House of Republicans. I guess the only Kevin that can protect his house is Kevin McAllister from Home Alone. But Kevin is only an example of an increasingly divided Republican Party, specifically within the House. Politico explains just 3 days ago that during the 2022 election, while House Republicans expected a red wave like this, instead, they got a red wave like this. But if anything, that's only exposing the flaws within the Republican Party. Because despite their narrow majority of only 9 seats, they promised that they would enforce a policy of obstruction, or in other words, delaying any Democratic Party that came across their table. But experts are wondering if they've gone too far, or if in other words, their policy of procrastination and obstruction is only hurting their own voters. But considering that our House of Republicans is formed of 435 elected representatives that then control the lives of 300 million Americans, including every single person in this room, we have to ask today's question. Will House Republican obstruction cost them their majority? And the answer is absolutely, because it's causing voter dissatisfaction within their own party. More specifically, first, through the debt ceiling deal and their procrastination on it. Second, through their immigration policies. And lastly, through their delayment in the investigation of Democrats. Now, recently, we find that one key reason why House Republicans are absolutely floundering is because our debt ceiling deal confirmed only 2 weeks ago. Talk about procrastination. But if anything, that's only caused dissatisfaction within moderate voters within the Republican Party, because it's only caused a split, which is the first reason why we find our answer to today's question is yes. In fact, NPR explains just 1 week ago that while the debt ceiling deal was indeed finalized by Speaker McCarthy, one key thing that we have to note is that it split the Republican Party apart, specifically through their reactions to the deal. Because while more moderate Republicans praised them, more extreme Republicans did not. In fact, some of them went to Twitter calling Kevin McCarthy an absolute demon. Talk about Gossip Girl. But if anything, that's going to reflect badly on them in elections, because as the Washington Post finds in an analysis in November of 2022, if the Republican Party had been as split and as polarized as it was even in November, they would have lost over 20 seats. Meaning that even though I'm no mathematician, 20 is greater than 9. Clearly, in the next midterms, they're going to lose that majority. Now, recently, Kevin McCarthy said that we have some things to learn from Korea's immigration style. But I'm over here like, what style? Gangnam Style? But in actuality, their immigration policy is hurting one key block of voters that propelled them to the very narrow majority they currently hold, and that's Hispanic voters. An article from the Kaiser Foundation further explains, just 2 months ago, that House Republicans actually obstructed a 4-month deal on immigration. But what that obstruction meant to the thousands of migrants on our border today is that for those 4 months, nobody could enter the border, and instead, they were stuck in inhumane conditions. But that reflects badly on the Hispanic voters that helped Republicans win in the 2022 midterms. But that's important, because as a different article from NPR, this time in March of 2023 finds that if the Republican Party had lost their advantage within Hispanic voters by only a 1% margin, then they would have lost over 5 seats. Take that to a 2% margin, they lose 13 seats. But clearly, as their obstruction for actually completing a deal on immigration has only left a taste of dissatisfaction in these Hispanic voters' minds, it's clear that they won't be standing with them when the next midterm rolls around, and therefore, they'll end up losing their majority. In speech and debate, every single tournament is a fashion competition. But in the GOP, it looks like we'll be seeing a new trendy fashion accessory: ankle bracelets, popularized by Trump's ankle monitor. But that's actually the last and final reason why we see that Republicans will actually be dissatisfied by their own elected members' obstruction, because they're obstructing a different kind of justice that they believe should be held accountable to the Democratic Party. The Washington Post, this time just 3 days ago, explains the Republicans are having a divided reaction, specifically because Trump has been indicted. Because while they see that the Democratic Party is achieving continuous stabs at their former president, the Democrats remain completely untouched. But that's unfair to them, because as the New York Times further explains just 1 week ago, as a result, Republicans' reactions have been incredibly split. Specifically, while they see that their former president is facing federal charges, they find it frustrating that while House Republicans opened an investigation into the Democratic Party all the way back in January, they still haven't received any progress. But therefore, because we can see that they've obstructed this justice to the Democratic Party, it's only clear that their frustrations against their elected officials will grow, and their majority will only be lost. So when returning to today's question, will House Republicans' obstruction cost them their majority? We find that the answer is absolutely, due to voter dissatisfaction within their own party. More specifically, first, because of the debt ceiling deal; second, because of their immigration policy; and lastly, because the obstruction of justice for the Democratic Party. So it looks like when the next midterm elections in 2026 rolls around, Kevin McCarthy will truly be home alone.
Our fourth speaker will be cross-examined by our third speaker, code 5579.
Congratulations on a great speech, and congratulations on making it to the national final stage. As always, I just have a few questions.
Go for it.
Let's start on this idea specifically about the debt ceiling. Is it fair to say that for Republican voters especially, the economy is usually a top-of-mind voting issue for them?
Yes.
Okay, so if the economy, especially short-term economic implications, are largely what Republicans vote on in the first place, is the debt ceiling deal from this year really gonna matter that much in a general election next year?
I would say so, because when people vote, they think about what they've done in the past. If House Republicans obviously, one, failed to elect a Speaker of the House effectively, but two, refused to let that Speaker of the House actually conduct policy that prevents a complete government shutdown. I'd say that's pretty memorable.
So you don't think it's gonna be 2 years is enough time to push it under the rug, especially when a general election is going to be so far away and you have to get through the primaries in the first place?
I wouldn't say so, because also, I feel that this kind of procrastination policy, when it comes to these kinds of economic issues, will only continue.
Okay, let's move on to immigration.
Sure.
Now, you specifically mentioned that there's not an immigration deal that's been done in the House, but isn't Title 42 ending a much larger deal than anything that the House of Representatives had done when it comes to immigration policy?
I wouldn't say so, because what I say is that they delayed it for 4 months. I am saying they did reach a deal, but that the obstruction in order to reach that deal was detrimental for Hispanic blocs.
Okay, and finally, let's talk about this idea that you bring up in your third point. When, in specific, we're talking about investigations. Can you tell me who's leading the investigation against President Trump?
Against President Trump?
Right.
The
right
DOJ
now.
and President.
Right, and so who is in charge of the DOJ?
Can you repeat your question?
Who is in charge of the Department of Justice?
I'm sure you could tell me.
It's the President of the United States. So if the House of Representatives doesn't have anything to do with bringing Donald Trump to justice, how can House Republicans have the same expectation placed upon them?
Well, they are having that same expectation placed upon them because the source I cite in my third point quite literally says that Republicans are feeling frustrated because while President Biden and the DOJ are continuously leading charges against Trump, we don't see that with Biden, but that's what they expect.
Awesome, thank you. Congratulations again.
Our fifth speaker today is code 5509, speaking on the topic, how would a robust organized labor movement impact the country? Again, how would a robust organized labor movement impact the country?
Earlier this year, At a Facebook workplace in Menlo Park, California, 500 cafeteria workers banded together and decided to unionize. They were tired of being treated as lesser than the software engineers they were constantly surrounded with. And after successful unionization, not only did they get the better pay that they had asked for, but the better benefits as well. But those cafeteria workers aren't alone. Across the country, from Amazon warehouses to Starbucks stores, more workers than ever are banding together. And yet, our nation is nowhere near where it once was when it comes to unions and organized labor, because as a Pew Research Center article published on May 23rd of just this year finds, although in 1983, 20% of Americans were involved with a labor union, today, only 10% are. Unions have long been a defining feature of worker power in this country. And so we must ask ourselves the question, how will a robust, organized labor movement impact this country? The answer is clear. By strengthening unions, it will make our country a more equal place. First, by better protecting worker rights. Secondly, by reining in the power of corporations. Before lastly and finally, strengthening economic mobility. Workers at Amazon warehouses are constantly denied the right to use the bathroom whenever they want. And anyone who's been stuck in the Extemp prep room at this tournament, well, they know exactly how that feels. But at most Amazon warehouses, things are a little bit more serious. The average injury rate there is 3 times the normal amount. That brings me to the first benefit of a stronger, more robust labor movement. It would protect worker rights in America. According to an article from the Economic Policy Institute, published on December 15th of 2022, when it comes to unions in this country, we are no longer working with them the way that we once used to. Decades ago, the government once spent billions upon billions of dollars working with labor unions to better enforce labor standards. But that EPI report found that in 2022, the US government only spent $2.2 million, an amount far too tiny to find all the worker abuse in this country today. That's why a robust labor movement would make our country so much a better place, as is articulated by the Washington Center for Equitable Growth in a report published on February 15th of 2022. Labor unions and a stronger labor union movement allows us to work with government agencies in a way that better catches when companies abuse worker rights, like the kind that Amazon imposes on their workers. That's why a stronger labor movement would make our country more equitable. When most Americans visit the cereal aisle, they think they're being flooded by choice. There's Cocoa Puffs, Rice Krispies, even Honey Nut Cheerios. But the truth is that just a few companies own all the variety we see. But a stronger, more robust labor movement would help fix that problem by reining in the power of corporations. An article from The Economist explains on May 12th of 2023 that over the past few decades, the biggest reason that corporations have gained power comes hand in hand with the way workers have lost power, largely due to the decline in organized labor and the loss in strength of organized labor in this country. That's because when unions and organized labor is strong, they can prevent things like wage theft and other profit-seeking mechanisms that allows the biggest companies to reap in more and more profits, strengthening and building themselves up even more than before. A stronger labor movement would once again restore that power to workers and help rein in the power of corporations. According to the Society for Human Resources Management, in a report published on May 11th of 2023, a resurgence in organized labor in this country would allow workers to use the power of collective bargaining to prevent things like wage theft and to prevent corporations from gaining more and more profits that they would then divest to the top investors rather than the workers down below. By doing so, we would restore power back from the hands of corporations to regular American people, reining in the power of corporations, and making our country a more equal place, economically speaking. But perhaps the most interesting thing about that story of the cafeteria workers in Menlo Park, California, is the way that they received health insurance benefits after unionization. This is absolutely critical, because after doing so, they were able to seek care for the problems that many of them had struggled for with decades. The last reason why it's so important that we see a resurgence in organized labor and the way that that would make our country more equal is because it would empower economic mobility in this country in a way that we haven't seen for years and years. An article in the Washington Post describes, on December 15th of 2023, how union workers are routinely paid 20% more than non-unionized workers. This statistic shows us that when people join unions and when there are more unions, it's people that work in low and middle income jobs that not only get paid more, but get the benefits that accompany an entrance to the middle class. Things like health insurance, dental insurance, and a retirement plan. And in an America where the middle class is constantly shrinking, a robust labor movement would make a clearer impact now than it would ever have before. As is explained by an article, this time again from The Economist, but on January 12th of 2023, a robust organized labor movement in the United States would bring back the introduction of such benefits like strong health insurance plans back to workers like those cafeteria workers that don't normally have access to them. Doing so would allow Americans to once again believe in the American dream, that no matter what circumstances you're born into, you can climb that ladder of economic opportunity. And so, when we come back and reconsider the question, how will a resurgent organized labor movement change the country? The answer becomes clear. It will make our country a more equal place. First, by protecting workers. Secondly, by reining in corporate power. And lastly, by strengthening economic mobility. Today, it's more important than ever before that those cafeteria workers are not the exception, but the rule.
Our fifth speaker will be cross-examined by our fourth speaker, code 5571.
Congratulations on a great speech. I just have a few questions. So what to you defines a robust organized labor movement?
I would say that a robust organized labor movement is any kind of labor movement that allows more workers to band together in greater numbers than we've typically been seeing for the past few decades. That means robust is a sort of general term, but when we look at to define those things, we need to compare it with where things are today. So any stronger labor movement than the kind we see today.
Okay, so considering that other workers, such as from the WGA, are currently organizing at 99.8%, but we don't see any change happening, how does your point solvency about all these workers organizing actually have an impact?
Well, this has been statistically proven through decades and decades of research. In fact, there was a recent study conducted by a team of Princeton economists that drew strong correlation to labor unions associated with these robust benefits that I described and with robust pay. The reason that we might not be seeing such a strong impact these days are because unions are in so little number. But when we take a historical look back at the trends, the correlation between worker power and labor movements become clear.
Okay, then let's look at what's happening right now. Thus far, the large corporations that you mentioned have only gotten greater in power. And you yourself admit in your second point that workers have lost power. In that case, where these kinds of large corporations can continuously replace workers, how do they actually have any bargaining power?
Well, this question is fundamentally about what we will see if there was a resurgent labor movement in this country, not asking me to predict that there will absolutely be one of such strength. I'm just saying that if we were to see a strong, organized labor movement, a more robust one, that would bring along with it all these benefits. And after hearing about the benefits of these organized labor unions, I think the case is strong for why these should once again make a comeback. That's time. Okay.
Our sixth and final speaker today is code 5573, speaking on the topic, what sector of the U.S. economy has the best potential for near-term growth? Again, what sector of the U.S. economy has the best potential for near-term growth?
Inflation can sometimes have some unexpected consequences. Former US President Ronald Reagan, also our sponsor today, used to joke that inflation is when you pay $15 for a $10 haircut. That used to cost you $5 back when you had hair. But fortunately for many Americans, as inflation continues to cool down in this country, haircuts might start to be affordable again. However, the Wall Street Journal writes just 3 hours ago that President Biden is committed to bringing inflation down, while at the same time turbocharging the American economy through passing critical pieces of legislation, like, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides billions of dollars of subsidies to a wide array of sectors and industries across the United States, including, most importantly, the green energy industry. And considering, as Dr. Elizabeth Kolbert writes in her book, The Sixth Extinction, that if we don't change course dramatically when it comes to the environment, we'll be handing a world to our children and their children that is dramatically different from what we know today. A world that will threaten their very existence. It becomes essential for us to ask today's question. What sector of the US economy has the best potential for near-term growth? And the answer is the green energy industry for 3 distinct reasons. More specifically, first, competition with China. Second, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And third and finally, it's finally starting to be more cost-effective. Now, the United States and its biggest adversary, China, oftentimes don't exist on the same wavelength. Let me explain. If you ask an American person what the time is, they'll most likely look at their watch. But if you ask a Chinese person what the time is, because of differences in the 2 languages, they'll look at their calendar. So what this means is that mostly the United States lives in the short term, while China thrives in the long term. But Biden is hoping to change that. Our first area of analysis today is competition with China is actually going to drive investment in green energy. Now, the Brookings Institution writes on April 2nd of 2022 that through China's plans, such as, for example, their 5-year plan, Xi Jinping's administration hopes to boost investment in green energy across the country. And experts are actually predicting that by the year 2035, 40% of the world's new investment in green energy and in climate change is actually going to come from China. And Joe Biden wants to change that. Through direct competition with China, he actually wants to increase the United States' role in new investment when it comes to the environment, which is why CNBC reports on April 2nd of 2023 that Biden has passed pieces of legislation, like, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides over $11 billion of government subsidies towards specifically green energy and the environment. But that's also having trickle-down effects as well. Because as the Peterson Institute for International Economics goes on to quantify on June 2nd of 2023, this governmental investment is also driving private investment as well, which is why we've seen a $95 billion increase in private sector investment in the green energy sector since the beginning of 2021. It's clear that because of Biden's interest in driving competition with China over the environment, we're seeing an increase in not only government subsidies, but also private investment as well, which is the biggest reason as to why in the United States, the industry with the most potential for near-term growth is going to be green energy. Now, five-star General Barry McCarthy once noted that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is the most bizarre and incompetent invasion in modern warfare history. And it's also having trickle-down effects as well. Our second area of analysis today is that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is going to drive growth in green energy. Now, the Cato Institute notes on June 2nd of 2023 that Russia is one of the world's biggest exporters of oil and natural gas. But after Russia's initial invasion of Ukraine, the entirety of the international community actually slapped sanctions on Russia that decreased their ability to export those products, which is why we've seen a 76% of Russian exports in oil and natural gas since the beginning of 2021. And while that's a good thing when it comes to human rights, it's left world leaders, including those in the United States, scrambling for alternative solutions. The New York Times continues on June 1st of 2023 that many of the best alternatives lie in renewable energy, which is why governments across the United States and the world have actually had an invested interest in putting more money towards renewable energy and clean energies across the international community. And experts predict that by the year 2025, 90% of new demand in green energy is actually going to come from this initial invasion of Ukraine by Russia, showing why Russia's invasion of Ukraine is quite possibly going to be one of the biggest reasons as to why we see more demand across the international community and in the United States for renewable energies. Now, Jessie J said in her one-hit wonder that it's not all about the money. And maybe, just maybe, that's why she isn't famous anymore. Because here in America, we know that it's all about the money, especially when it comes to cost. Our third and final area of analysis today is that because it's more cost-effective, we're going to see more demand for green energy. Now, the Peterson Institute for International Economics, this time on March 29th of 2023, contends that one of the biggest reasons in the past as to why people avoided green energy, especially from a commercial point of view, was because it was extremely expensive. But that's starting to change. The Washington Post contextualizes on January 29th of 2023 that over the course of the past 2 years, we've seen the prices for oil, natural gas, and coal skyrocket dramatically by over 70% as Saudi Arabia and OPEC continue to push prices higher. But on the other hand, Time magazine writes on June 1st of 2023 that prices for renewable energies like offshore wind energy and solar energy have decreased significantly, with both offshore and onshore wind energy decreasing in price by 23% since 2017, and solar energy decreasing in price by over 46% since that very same year. Because oil and natural gas continues to grow more expensive across the international community and in the United States, while renewable energies continue to become more cost-effective as well, it's clear that it's going to be one of the world's and the United States' fastest-growing industries in the short term. Considering that we now hold in our hands the pen that will write the future of our world's story, it's clear that we must craft a tale of courage, not catastrophe. And so, in the final analysis and answering today's question, what sector of the US economy has the best potential for near-term growth? Our answer was the green energy industry for three major reasons. More specifically, first, competition with China. Second, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And third and finally, it's starting to become more cost-effective. After all, we can talk about governmental policy all we want, but it's up to each and every one of us in this room to actually make a difference. And if we don't, and the American government doesn't either, then we and millions of other Americans across the country will be haunted by the words of the poet, T.S. Eliot. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper.
Our sixth speaker will be cross-examined by our fifth speaker, code 5509.
First off, I'd like to congratulate you on an amazing speech. I really feel like it was super informative, and I now know way more about green energy. So
Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you. Just a few questions.
Of course.
First, to start off, is there a guarantee that Joe Biden, or actually any Democrat, will be in power in 2025?
No, there isn't, but we've already seen that initial investment coming from the government and the private sector as well, which is more than enough to turbocharge the investment across the course of the next couple of years in green energy.
Are there senators, perhaps some Republicans, some moderate Democrats, that might have objections to green energy growth that might wipe out their home industries of, say, coal?
Sure, but we've already seen that initial investment of tens of billions of dollars. That's enough to change everything.
Okay, so we see an initial investment of a couple $2 billion right now. What does that look like in just 2 to 3 years if there's political backlash to green energy, unlike perhaps other more moderate sectors of the economy?
Well, the question that I'm presented with today is what industry is going to grow the quickest? Because of that investment that we're seeing right now in the status quo, it's already leading to development in the industry itself. $100 billion is nothing to scoff at, and it's going to lead to the development of the green energy industry now and years in the future.
To implement that actual investment, don't policymakers from the state level all the way down to the local level have to comply with investment and business decisions?
We've already put that investment on the table. It's already happening.
But it's Republican lawmakers, some of them, that have to actually spend that money willingly, right, to grow the green energy sector?
I don't think you understand. We've already spent the money.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
At this time, please welcome the semifinalists in Carmendale Fernandez United States Extemporaneous Speaking, presented by the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, to the stage. Congratulating today's semifinalists and finalists is board member Adam Jacoby. Your semifinalists in Carmendale Fernandez United States Extemporaneous Speaking are, in 14th place, Isabella Rasden from Lincoln East High School in Nebraska, coached by Nick Heinrich and Elle Bartz. In 13th place, Sunny D. Sundaramurthy from Gabrielino High School in California, coached by Derek Yule and Eric Chen. In 12th place, Molly James from Blue Valley High School in Kansas, coached by Chris Riffer. In 11th place, Sathvik Kanan from Columbia Hickman High School in Missouri, coached by Danielle Johnson, Lou Kraxberger, Candy King, and Anna Felavalli. In 10th place, Jonathan Tubb from St. Mary's Hall in Texas, coached by Matthew Reichley. In 9th place, Vikram Menon from Millard North High School in Nebraska, coached by Sabrina Denny Bull. In 8th place, Dave Uaja from Solon High School in Ohio, coached by Dan Cece. And in 7th place, Srinath Hariharan from Woodbury High School in Minnesota, coached by Lily Piper and Sam Padmapan. any student or team who places in the top 14th in a main event at this year's tournament will be automatically invited back to participate in that same event at the 2024 national tournament. Would any of you who just completed the 9th, 10th, or 11th grade please move forward? It is my pleasure to congratulate these students on auto-qualifying to the United States Extemporaneous Speaking for next year's national tournament. Semifinalists, please exit stage left. Congratulations. Let's welcome the finalists in United States Extemporaneous Speaking to the stage for introduction. Speaking first, Theodore Gherkin from College Prep in California, coached by Lexi Green. Speaking second, Megana Cunaparardi from Tompkins High School in Texas, coached by Roglio Rios. Speaking third, Nate Watts from Carlsbad High School in California, coached by Minia Curtis and Melissa Kay. Speaking fourth, Catherine Lee from Plano West Senior High School in Texas, coached by Roby Holland and Reginald Chapman. Speaking fifth, Faye Zhang from Eastview High School in Minnesota, coached by Todd Herring. Speaking sixth, Kyle Lederer from Plano West Senior High School in Texas, coached by Roby Holland and Reginald Chapman. Would any of you who just completed the 9th, 10th, or 11th grade please move forward? It is my pleasure to congratulate these students on auto-qualifying in United States Extemporaneous Speaking for next year's national tournament. You all may exit stage.
You can be amazing, you can turn a phrase into a weapon or a drug. You can be the outcast, to be the backlash of somebody's lack of love. Or you can start speaking up. Nothing's gonna hurt you the way the words do when they settle near your skin. Kept on the inside and no sunlight, sometimes a shadow wins. But I wonder what would happen if you say what you wanna say and let the words fall out. Honestly, I wanna see you be brave with what you wanna say and let the words fall out. Honestly, I wanna see you be brave. I just wanna see you. I just wanna see you. I wanna see you
So, just an update. We are waiting on draw, of course, to ensure that the first speaker has a full 30 minutes of draw. So we will begin the round in about 15 minutes, just so everyone knows. About 15 minutes, the round will begin. Thank you.
I chose the O'Neill School because of its mission to lead for the greater good.
I came to O'Neill to study law and public policy.
Environmental management.
Healthcare management and policy.
Arts management.
Policy analysis.
O'Neill really attracts the best of the best, in my opinion. From faculty, talent, students, there's just so much going on.
O'Neill creates leaders, and we are expected to go out into the world after this and make a difference.
This has built so many skills for me, such as confidence, charisma, and also how to research effectively, how to write speeches effectively, how to present to an audience. The American Legion, because of this contest, has taught me so many different life skills that I will definitely use in the future.
Wasn't one of them good enough? 'Cause you're upside down and inside out, and you can feel it. Inside down and upside out, and you can feel it, feel it. Don't stop, can't stop, it's like a freight train. Don't stop, can't stop till you feel it going down. I wish I had said the things you thought that I had said. It's just a habit that you're pretty sure you can break. Upside down and inside out, and you can go. Don't stop, can't stop until you feel it going down. Upside down and inside out, and you can go. Don't stop, can't stop until you feel it going down. Hey baby, won't you look my way? I can be your new addiction. Hey baby, what you gotta say? All you're giving me is fiction. I'm a sorry sucker and this happens all the time. I find out that everybody talks, everybody talks, everybody talks. It started with a whisper, and that was when I kissed her. And then she made my lips hurt. I could hear the chit-chat. Take me to your love shack. Mama's always got a backtrack when everybody talks back. Hey honey, you could be my drug. You could be my new prescription. Too much could be an overdose. All this trash talk make me itchy. Oh my shit. Everybody talks, everybody talks, everybody talks too much. It started with a whisper, and that was when I kissed her. And then she made my lips hurt. I could hear the chit-chat. Take me to your love shack. Mama's always got a backtrack when everybody talks back. Never thought I'd live to see the day
Well, you've been so darn patient that I feel like maybe we ought to throw a couple of these out into the crowd. So let's see who's the most excited. Let's go. Welcome to A.C. Ely International Extemporaneous Speaking, presented by the Council on Foreign Relations. Let's meet our judges. Sharing an incredible name, from St. Cloud State University, assistant professor who is a three-diamond coach with 18 plus years of experience in the activity, has coached multiple national finalists, has been on the Equity BIS committee for the past 5 years. That's right, J. Scott Baker. She has 8 years of experience in speech. Second time judging at nationals from Valdosta High School in Georgia, Georgette Willis. A two-diamond coach from the North Coast District, Daniel Cece. Co-head coach at Chaska High, 10 years coaching experience in Extemp and also competed in Extemp. NSTA Southern Minnesota District Coach of the Year, Andrew Brady. He's been in speech and debate for over 10 years. Assistant coach at Northeast High School in Florida. Instructor of the Invicta Debate Camp and veteran of speech and debate, Jomi Apoyun. A two-diamond coach and the 2020 NSTA Educator of the Year and Chair of the Sagebrush District, Christy Briggs. He's a six-diamond coach from Bob Jones Academy in South Carolina. He is also one of our judge chairs during the national tournament, Chuck Nicholas. Acting coach, is a multiple-time middle school national championship coach with 11 years of coaching experience and is 20-plus year veteran of SAG-AFTRA actress Jung Park. A diamond coach, District Coach of the Year in 2023 from Thunder Basin High School in Wyoming, Sasha Davidson. Coach with 6+ years of experience in the activity from Oak Grove High School in Mississippi, Jude Sims Barber. A six-diamond coach with over 30 years of coaching experience and this year's Pelham Award winner. That's right, that is Mario Herrera. Longtime veteran, two-diamond coach with 29 years of experience. NFHS Outstanding Speech Debate Educator for Section 4, Kenneth Carter. A 5-diamond coach, member of the Hall of Fame. He's coached 3 national champions in Extemp and 5 top 10 teams in policy debate. He is this year's Ralph E. Carey Award winner for outstanding service as a district leader, Chris McDonald. Please welcome tournament official Rory McKenzie to facilitate the International Extemporaneous Speaking Final Round.
Good morning. Welcome to the final round of International Extemporaneous Speaking. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the rest of the TAP staff for IX this week. This event could not happen without all the wonderful people helping. They are Tom Tobin from Missouri, Vicki Hyde from Washington, Hall of Famer Eloise Blair from Texas, Hall of Famer Gail Nicholas from South Carolina, and Matt Good from Missouri. And our fearless Extemp prep room workers led by Hall of Famer Pam McComas and Joe Ball of Kansas. Knowledge of the world is essential to understanding our place in it. By expanding our awareness of the world around us, we gain the power to shape it and make informed decisions that can lead to positive change. And with these students, there is surely much positive change on the horizon. We started this week with 271 phenomenal speakers, but now I am so honored to present our final 6 competitors. Our first speaker today is code 5035, speaking on the topic, will electric vehicles be a net good for the environment despite challenges with battery disposal? Again, will electric vehicles be a net good for the environment despite challenges with battery disposal?
Halloween is my favorite time of the year. Surprisingly, being scared brings me a large amount of joy, despite it being the opposite of what it was originally supposed to do. However, one scare that I hate to feel is the scare of climate change. In fact, according to a Forbes article posted on January 5th of 2023, if we continue on our track of climate emissions without cutting it in half by 2030, we will guarantee to surpass the 2 degrees Celsius limit that many scientists are saying it would be impossible to return from. Luckily, we have new technology to help fight against this. Most importantly, when it comes to the electric vehicle industry, trying to fight against internal combustion engines. Because according to an article posted by Statista on January 18th of 2023, in 2020 alone, combustion engine vehicles contributed nearly 3 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But electric cars can be the solution. However, they have problems specifically with their lithium batteries. According to an article posted by The Guardian on May 18th of 2023, when disposing of these batteries, specifically shoving them into a landfill, can not only hurt the environment and the atmosphere, but it can catch the entire landfill on fire, putting all those emissions into the atmosphere as well. The fight for climate change is no longer just for our generation. Rather, it's for our kids and our kids' kids so they can see the beautiful world we have today. So we must ask today's very important question. Will electric vehicles be a net good for the environment despite challenges with battery disposal? And the answer to this is a clear yes. And we can look at the 3 major ways to source lithium to see why. First, we can look at lithium mining. Next, on how to properly dispose of lithium. And then finally, arguably most importantly, is how to recycle this lithium. When it comes to the Halloween season, I love to watch scary stories. One of my favorites is of zombies in a mine. However, one part that's always scarier than these zombies is how much emissions can come from a lithium mine, leading us to the first important reason as to how electric vehicles will be a net good, because these lithium mines are getting better and more productive than ever. In fact, when we look to the past, according to an article posted by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology on December 22nd of 2022, to mine 1 ton of lithium requires nearly 15 tons of carbon dioxide to go into the atmosphere. Luckily, however, there is new technology to fix this issue, where according to research done at Princeton University on January 5th of 2023, there is new technology to get lithium from seawater. However, the benefit to this is that many greedy corporations are looking to gain access to this lithium, because this lithium is arguably more valuable than Prickles is to a speech and debate kit. However, when we look to these greedy corporations, they want to get into this booming market, specifically trying to mine this lithium and can use this new technology that doesn't have the large emissions that happened in the past. When it comes to the Halloween season, I am always scared of the different characters that happen all around these movies, specifically during the haunted houses. One of my favorites takes place inside of a landfill, where I never know what's gonna pop out. However, what's always scarier than the monsters inside of the landfills is what happens when we improperly dispose of these lithium batteries. In fact, when we dispose of lithium batteries the correct way, we can have a huge net benefit to the environment, where according to the EPA here in the United States, on May 5th of 2023, when we dispose of lithium batteries correctly, taking them to the right organization, we are able to minimize the damage that comes along with these lithium batteries, limiting the risk of catching these landfills on fire, and most importantly, limiting the problem of the emissions going into the atmosphere. So, when we decide to properly dispose of these lithium batteries in the future, the problems that we are seeing now with lithium batteries in landfills can nearly disappear because we can eliminate them with our modern technology. Overall, when we look to properly disposing of these lithium batteries, specifically in electric vehicles in the future, when we dispose of them correctly, we can see a large decline in the damages that happen. And when we see the huge benefit of emissions, taking off that 3 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide released from combustion engines, we can see a huge net benefit. When it comes to Halloween, I swear that they recycle so many different characters, whether it be clowns, zombies, or Michael Myers. But this leads us to the third important reason as to why electric vehicles will be a net benefit, because we are able to recycle them better than ever before. In fact, according to an article posted by Scientific America on May 18th of 2023, recycling batteries is extremely expensive. However, we are seeing new technology that's able to develop it to be cheaper, but arguably more important, they are able to magically be more efficient than their predecessor recycled batteries. This is a huge jump forward not only for the environment, but also for the greedy corporations that are looking to help this issue. In fact, according to an article posted by CNBC on January 15th of 2023, we are seeing a large amount of investment inside of this lithium recycling. Nearly $2 billion in loans being invested into making these recycling factories, so we can get these lithium batteries out of the landfill and put back into electric vehicles. Overall, when we look back to recycling these styles of lithium batteries, we have new technology that's able to do it better, faster, and more efficient than before, leaving these corporations to invest billions of dollars in doing so. So we will see a huge net benefit to the environment because these lithium batteries that caused problems in the past will only have a benefit in the future. Today, we asked the very important question: will electric vehicles be a net good for the environment despite challenges with battery disposal? And the answer to this was a clear yes. And we saw this for 3 different reasons when approaching lithium batteries. First is new technology in mining the lithium, making it cheaper and better than ever before for the environment. Next is that showing when you properly dispose of the lithium, it doesn't have as much damage. And finally, that recycling is better than ever and can reuse this lithium that used to cause problems. No matter how much I love Halloween, nothing scares me more than climate change. Thank you.
Our first speaker will be cross-examined by our 6th speaker, code 5042.
Congratulations on a great speech.
Thank you.
I just have a couple of questions.
Of course.
Let's begin with an overarching one.
The question specifically asks for the net good of electric vehicles despite battery disposal problems. All of your points talk about mitigatory ways we're trying to solve the battery problem, but you never actually compare it to why EVs are good. So can you give me that now?
So what I explained in the intro is that when we look to internal combustion engines in 2020 alone, they released nearly 3 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, where we saw drastically more in previous years. When we go into these electric vehicles, not only do they have no internal combustion engine creating the emissions in the first place, but many of the materials on an electric vehicle last longer, like brakes.
All right, let's move on to your first point about mining issues right now. Considering even though we're decreasing the emissions associated with lithium mining, it's still not even net zero carbon neutral. Doesn't that indicate that EVs can't be beneficial or a net good to the environment?
Okay, so for this one, I'm going to look back to the question stating that only requires me to prove that it will be a net good for the environment, meaning I have to prove 51%. With this improvement in technology, we are seeing that this environmental impact is decreasing drastically, making these electric cars better than ever and a huge benefit to the environment.
Okay, let's group together your second and third points. Considering battery disposal and recycling is a really big problem right now, can you give me a single type of storage or disposal technology that has been invented that actually prevents emissions or even radioactive leakages that have already occurred in countries like France and Germany?
Okay, so what I spoke to in these specific points, first with the EPA, is they have specific departments developing specific technology to approach lithium disposal. And then the third point, I argue that these recycling factories are being invested in greater than ever, where we saw nearly $2 billion in loan just this year being invested in this technology to create factories to recycle this technology. When we look to these greedy corporations, they're looking to get into this environment as much as possible, and recycling and disposal is growing.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our second speaker today is code 5008, speaking on the topic, how can the world's highly developed countries take a stronger stance on the climate crisis? Again, how can the world's highly developed countries take a stronger stance on the climate crisis?
Being in the prep room of the 2023 Extemporaneous Tournament was truly an unforgettable experience. I learned the value of keeping our environment in the gymnasium clean, ensuring that we throw away all disposable materials, and of course, enforcing equity across the board. If only we could protect our environment in the same way that we protected our prep. Unfortunately, although nations around the world have certainly made commitments to ensure that climate change does not destroy our impending future, those commitments have yet to be met, leading to disastrous consequences, whether it be in terms of famine and drought, the displacement of millions of people, or the incredible losses of employment. And as a result, when we look at a report done by the Center for Biological Diversity, where we were told that in the next 20 years, more than 3 billion people will be adversely affected by climate change, putting them more vulnerable where they have ever been before, it becomes imperative to look to those who have the power to change the narrative, making us ask today's question. How should the world's highly developed nations take a stronger chance on climate change? And the answer to this question, quite simply, is that they need to up their game by making reforms to past agreements. First, by ensuring that lower developed nations have access to resources that they need. Next, by ensuring that they are held accountable for their pledges. And third, and finally, by accelerating the process of decarbonization. Now, first, when we come to this general idea, it is clear to see that although many people and many nations are not exactly producing as much carbon dioxide as they are feeling the effects, we live in an unequal world. It's a world where not everyone here can have access to the beloved prickles, but more importantly, it's also a world where the nations that contribute the least are the ones that feel the effects the most. Bringing us to our first point of today, the fact that assistance to these lower income nations must be increased. As told to us by the World Bank just last year, Bangladesh, just one of many lower developed nations, has only contributed 0.4% of the globe's total carbon emissions. And yet, despite the small number, that hasn't stopped them from leaving more than 30 million people, not just within the nation, but also fleeing as well as a result of these adverse effects. They are being disproportionately affected by the problem. But when looking at a report by the International Monetary Fund, which tells us that all in all speaking, when looking at the funds attributed to these climate change efforts, these countries on a global scale are only paying 0.25% of the global GDP, which seems manageable enough for all nations, regardless of economic status. But when we hone in on these smaller nations and when we scroll down in that report, what we are further told is that to some smaller island nations, they are paying more than 20% of their GDP, a momentous number. What needs to happen is that these other higher developed nations need to make due on their previous pledges and directly support these nations. Now, in the past, when looking at the Paris Agreement, although there are funds that are currently set up to do exactly this, many nations are not meeting their dues or their requirements. But instead, as told to us by the United Nations, what can happen and what can be facilitated at a greater level is bilateral agreements. This being the first way that smaller nations will be able to gain access to these necessary resources in the way that direct partnerships can then help mitigate the consequences that they are feeling more than anyone else. But second, when world powers first came together in the Paris Agreement, they all promised that they would meet their pledges because, you know, politicians always keep their promises. Bringing us to our second point of today, the fact that in this case, politicians must be held accountable to keeping those promises. In the past 7 years, ever since the Paris Agreement was first instated, many nations pledged that they would continue to uphold this ideal of not letting the globe's climate temperature increase past 2 degrees Celsius. But there is no requirements or management that is overseeing these efforts, instead leading many of them to actually not reach these pledges. As furthered by the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, my safety school, we were told that instead of these countries actually meeting these pledges, instead they are only continuing to increase the temperature of the globe. Not intentionally, of course, but instead because they're simply not doing enough. So this brings us to our second point of today, the fact that the nations must be held to a steady standard. As a result, as furthered by Brookings Institution, an international think tank, what this means for not just the Paris Agreement, but the world as a whole, is that these highly developed nations, like the United States, ones within the European Union and Australia, are no longer just being forced to attend meetings when they don't meet their requirements, but are instead actually forced to fulfill them, thus mitigating climate change on a much grander level. But third and finally, saying that what we have in place as of right now is enough to combat climate change is a lot like saying that extemporaneous speaking is actually fun to watch. Yeah, we all know that one's a lie. Bringing me to my third and final point of today, the fact that more needs to happen. Now, when coming back to this idea of the Paris Agreement, we saw very specifically that in the past, although this 2 degrees Celsius threshold was held concrete in the future, as reported to us by BBC just 1 month ago, we are projected to rise by more than 2.7 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, a disastrous number. So instead, our efforts and our third idea of today are that higher developed nations must accelerate their decarbonization process. One example of this can be seen directly from the White House website, when they tell us that many of their projects pertaining to high-level infrastructure only begin in 2030. And that is when the global temperature is projected to already rise by more than 0.4 degrees Celsius, a disastrous number. So, for the sake of the 3 billion people reported earlier who are facing disastrous effects as a result of climate change, but more importantly, for the 8 billion people across the world, higher developed nations, when returning to today's question, must do more to combat the adverse effects of climate change, whether that be first, through financing lower developed nations, next, by ensuring that they are meeting the measures that they promised to fulfill, or third and finally, by ensuring that they are accelerating their efforts. At the end of the day, while we did an incredible job of protecting the PrEP, it's time to take the lessons we learned to a much higher level internationally. Thank you.
Our second speaker will be cross-examined by our first speaker, code 5035.
All right, great speech. I just have a few questions. So my first question about your first point with developing countries, I love the impact that comes from this. However, would it be better for the environment if these stronger countries were to invest this money in themselves?
They should certainly be investing money in themselves, as said through my third point, through the infrastructure. But the first point is more pertinent towards the impacts, and that is in the sense that these smaller nations are still comprised of millions of individuals who will be adversely feeling the effects of what is soon to happen. So my question was pertaining towards what stronger stances they can take. And in this case, my first point was all about safety of not just their own populations, but those who are affected the most.
All right, thank you. So I have another question on your second point. I love the analysis on the impact of the tragedy of the commons. However, why will stopping countries like from Australia attending meetings actually make them impact the environment?
Sorry, just to clarify that, are you questioning the current status of forcing countries like Australia to just attend meetings?
No, in your argument, you explained that one of the punishments we could provide was having them stop attending the meetings if they aren't meeting the requirements, correct?
No, what I had said was that that is the current idea that is happening. Instead of actually holding these concrete measures, the only consequences for current nations is that they attend a panel where they discuss with their friends about what can be done in the future. But that's not enough.
Okay, what could be a future plan to actually adequately punish these countries?
Absolutely. So one idea would be purely economically based. Especially following the COVID-19 pandemic, the idea of money is more tangible as leverage than ever before. Not necessarily sanctions, but ensuring that there are economic fines and prices to not meeting what you are promising is necessary.
Don't we see those fines in many other organizations around the world today and they still don't work?
Can you give me examples as to which
So we can see this in different UN organizations that require, like the United States, to pay if they continue their carbon emissions. And wealthy nations like the United States just continue to pay rather than fix their issues.
Yes, but the general idea is that not only does this reflect poorly on being part of these 192 nations that are in the Paris Agreement, but more importantly, these leverage and this economic turmoil can be scaled up because this is an international effort that is comprised of more nations than nearly any other organization worldwide.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Great speech.
Our third speaker today is code 5144, speaking on the topic, how should the world prepare for the appearance of new diseases due to climate change? Again, how should the world prepare for the appearance of new diseases due to climate change?
This year,
an elementary school in New Jersey announced a new part of their curriculum, tasking 7-year-olds with coming up with solutions to climate change, which means our world leaders are now in a live game show rendition of Are You Smarter Than a 7-Year-Old? Personally, I like 7-year-old Gabby's suggestion of sticking penguins in a refrigerator. Honestly, put her in charge of the NSDA supply store. Then maybe I'd have a President Prickles. But that's not the only thing that 7-year-olds are clocking world leaders with. Harvard Medical School explains in a study done on May 2nd, 2023, that as climate change has exacerbated crises around the world with new natural disasters, global warming, and more, it's also exacerbated the rise of new infectious diseases, either variants of existing problems or brand new pathogens themselves. Most recently, that aforementioned article found that in the next 20 years, these new diseases will cost the lives of at least 250,000 people. So considering that Yale University explains that climate change could cause the next global pandemic, but also because in the time it took me to prepare this speech, 2 individuals lost their lives because of climate change-related problems, it becomes imperative that we ask today's question. How should the world combat the rise of new infectious diseases due to climate change? The answer is by proactively addressing the root of the problem. We can see how in 3 main ways. First, by fighting water scarcity in African nations. Second, by increasing funding for sterilization in hospitals. And finally, by funding desperately needed new vaccines. Now first, the policy debaters on my team tell me that anything, ranging from oil to mosquitoes, is somehow going to cause nuclear war or environmental catastrophe. Or just result in them not being able to get a prom date. Either way, this time, they're right, giving us the first way that the international community can respond to the new rise of infectious diseases due to climate change by primarily fighting water scarcity across Africa. The problem is explained by the Council on Foreign Relations on May 22nd, 2023, which finds that nations with high rates of drought, a natural symptom of climate change, have a 68% higher risk of developing a new waterborne disease, either a variant of an existing one or a brand new pathogen itself. This is already happening in countries across Africa, and the reason for that is explained by the New York Times on May 15th, 2023, which found that 1 in 3 people across Africa don't have access to clean water because of existing droughts, which means they're drinking contaminated water, developing new diseases, and dying from them. But the solution is one that's already been proposed at the United Nations last year, when they developed and announced an $11 billion plan to create new water infrastructure across African nations. Doing so wouldn't just create more clean water for across the continent, but it would also ensure that for the 500,000 children who die of water-related diseases every year in Africa alone, climate change wouldn't spell the end of their lives, too. But it's not just about having access to clean water. It's also about your hospitals being able to treat you in the first place. This is the second way that the international community can prepare for the spread of new infectious diseases due to climate change by funding critically needed sterilization tools across hospitals. The Washington Post explains in an article published just 3 days ago a problem known as Lassa fever, which is primarily spreading across Western Africa right now, exacerbated by higher temperatures. But the reason climate change is allowing these higher temperatures to create more infections, 30,000 new ones every year, isn't just because of climate change itself, but also because of underprepared hospitals. A study done by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace tells us on May 12, 2023, that right now, 3 in every 4 hospitals across Western Africa don't have access to alcohol wipes in their operating rooms, which means that Lassa fever is more likely to be contracted in a hospital than out in the real world. But in order to fight not just this new climate change-related disease, but also the root of its cause, the United Nations can do what it did in Kenya last year, creating a drive for free sterilization wipes for all 347 hospitals across the country. Doing so wouldn't just ensure that climate change-related diseases couldn't spread in the places where people are supposed to be safest, but it would stop the deaths of millions of people around the world. But finally, it doesn't make a lot of sense when brand new diseases pop up with brand new variants. Less sense than Maddie Healy and Taylor Swift's relationship. But there is a very common sense solution, and it's not just Team Harry Styles. The third and final way that the international community can prepare for the spread of brand new infectious diseases due to climate change is by funding critically needed new vaccine research. The Council on Foreign Relations explains in a separate article, this time written on May 11th, 2023, that the Zika virus, because of climate change, is now causing brand new infections across nations like Brazil. About 35,000 new variants of the disease every single year. And the reason for this isn't because there's more mosquitoes, but just because they're in a different place. The Conversation explains this on May 12th, 2023, telling us that rising temperatures in the south of South America have caused mosquitoes to migrate to northern Brazil. And when this happens, the new variants spread too. But there are no vaccines currently in development to combat this new strain of the virus. Fortunately, though, Yale Medical School has a solution, reporting just 2 days ago about 3 brand new vaccines currently in development. They just need funds from the World Health Organization to complete that development. When that happens, not only will there be an international fund for combating the rise of climate change-related diseases easily treatable by vaccines, but it means we won't hear stories like 5-year-old Artur's ever again. Because right now, he's bedridden in a hospital in Brazil because of a new Zika variant. So, upon returning to today's question, how should the international community respond to the rise of infectious diseases due to climate change? The answer is by creating proactive solutions to the root of their spread. We saw how in 3 main ways. First, by fighting water scarcity across Africa. Second, by funding sanitization options in hospitals. And finally, by funding critical new vaccine research. So, whilst 5-year-old Gabby might have a better idea for how to fight climate change than our world leaders, for Prickles and for the rest of the world, let's listen to her.
Our third speaker will be cross-examined by our second speaker, code 5008.
First of all, congratulations on an amazing speech and making it out here to finals today.
Thank you.
I just have a few questions. First, beginning with your first point.
Okay.
So would you agree that nations, specifically in Africa, such as Libya, Ethiopia, and Sudan, have been torn apart by war in the country?
Yes.
Perfect. So with that being said, hasn't it also been known in the past that these governments have weaponized their water flows and food in order to wreak havoc on their communities?
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that fighting water scarcity is going to be an easy solution to implement for the United Nations. What I am saying is that if we want to stop waterborne diseases, especially new pathogens that are being developed every time a drought occurs across Africa, creating better water infrastructure, like we did in Kenya, Somalia, and more, would only help that problem.
And these solutions would all require further assistance from the government, which in many of these nations have often been known to not be open to international and bilateral agreements verbally.
No, I think Ethiopia would be pretty happy to have assistance from the United Nations to clean up their water.
All right, thank you. Moving on to your second point then. You refer to the entire idea of sanitization, but doesn't both Doctors Without Borders and the World Health Organization already have initiatives specific to this, especially in Africa?
If that were true, 73% of hospitals across Africa wouldn't not have access to alcohol wipes in their operating rooms.
All right, so your main point here is that further resources have to be allocated to these pre-existing organizations.
Exactly.
All right, thank you for that clarification. And moving on to your third and final point. Generally speaking, what would you say that the status of the vaccine distribution system in our world actually is?
Pretty great. We have organizations like COVAX that collect international vaccines like we did for the COVID-19 pandemic and then distribute them to nations across the world like Ethiopia, Somalia, Brazil, and more. All of those nations wouldn't have been able to afford the COVID-19 vaccine without that organization.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Our fourth speaker today is code 5040, speaking on the topic, is the United Nations International Court of Justice, or the ICJ, a safe haven for environmental accountability? Again, that's is the United Nations International Court of Justice, the ICJ, a safe haven for environmental accountability?
In a recent speech delivered to foreign ministers, the Chinese President Xi Jinping attacked a lot of climate activists using homophobic and racist slurs. It was a hateful and unhinged speech that actually has a lot of Floridians calling him electable. And although Alligator Man is a big fan of Xi Jinping, it's clear that the United Nations rights for climate change probably isn't. Because according to the Atlantic Council on May 17th of this year, the United Nations International Court of Justice is an international system that tries and litigates international problems, including those regarding environmental concerns, such as a recent flooding within Indonesia, in which NPR recently reported that while rescuers are still looking for survivors of this Indonesian flood, they pause every single 10 minutes to hear the screams of both women and children. Yet, every single 10 minutes, all they hear is silence. But it's not just because of these moments of pause that we ask today's question, but it's also because the environment infects not just me and you, but the next generation that we ask, is the United Nations International Court of Justice, better known as the ICJ, a safe haven for environmental accountability? And the answer, unfortunately, is no, because of its jurisdiction failures. More specifically, first, it has no strings on corporations. Second, because of the giants' polluters' influence. And finally, because it cannot humanize the effects of climate change. Now, countries like China have actually passed or printed out more than 800 pages detailing how they're going to combat climate change. But the first solution probably should have just been, don't print 800 pages of anything. Now, though China isn't the best at communicating environmental accountability, neither is the ICJ. The first reason, and why the International Criminal Court of Justice isn't necessarily the best safe haven for environmental accountability, is because it has no strings on corporations. Today, corporations make up the largest amounts of pollution in the international community. According to the International Crisis Group, it contextualizes just 2 years ago that more than 95% of all oil spills can be stemmed back from corporations. Yet many of the times, they get untouched by the ICJ, mainly because they have no strings on these corporations. Foreign Policy magazine continues to articulate on May 17th of this year that whenever the ICJ tries to subpoena a lot of CEOs or corporate leaders, they have no power to force them into trial. Additionally, such as the MV Makashio oil spill, whenever they spilled more than 1,000 tons of oil within the Indian Ocean, millions of marine life and also people's homes were decimated. Yet at the same time, no CEO, no leader was tried by the ICJ, showing that the ICJ's jurisdiction over corporations is highly limited. And whenever they make up the largest amounts of pollution, environmental accountability truly can't be met by the UN. Now, a recent report found by the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change found that pollution within the Indian Ocean has gotten so bad that it's so filled with plastic that they're probably using the same surgeon as the Kardashians. And although the Indian Ocean is not necessarily safe towards climate change, it's clear that the ICJ isn't going to make it any better. The second reason and why the ICJ isn't going to be a safe haven for environmental accountability is because of the pollution influence of giants. Today, the United Nations Security Council has a lot of influence on the ICJ's own power. For example, Ian Bremer, the director of the Eurasia Group, found just a year ago that today, the United Nations Security Council is made by both permanent and non-permanent members like the United States, India, China, and Russia. All of these countries also happen to be the largest global polluters, but they also have a large influence on the ICJ, as they make up the panel who litigates problems of environmental concerns. But as the Wall Street Journal continues to contextualize, on January 15th of this year, that even though the UN Security Council preaches green initiatives, countries like Germany and even the United States still depend on more than 60% of their energy from hydrocarbons and fossil fuels, showing that they're still incentivized to side with people and companies that not necessarily actually align with the ICJ. And when more than 30 people have died due to coal fumes within Bangladesh, more than 20 people have been hospitalized from sulfur poisoning in Kazakhstan, it's clear that the ICJ truly isn't going to be a safe haven for accountability. Now, the United Nations is recently looking for peacekeepers who fit the description of being tall, thin, and women. Yeah, that's probably why I've been having so many calls from the United Nations. And although peacekeepers are working for the United Nations, it's clear that they're not humanizing the problem. According to the Wall Street Journal, this time again, in an article published on May 15th of last year, a lot of the problems within climate and environmental concerns are local issues. But at the same time, the United Nations ICJ has really no arm to extend to local individuals. For example, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace's European director, Judy Dempsey, found just 2 years ago that whenever the ICJ tries to litigate problems for climate change, they rely on regional workers. But at the same time, there are very few regional workers that can reach out to local problems. That's why many times more than 30% of the environmental concerns are largely ignored by the ICJ. Whenever the people on the ground are who matter when it comes to environmental concerns, and the ICJ can't even humanize those issues, it's clear that they are not a safe haven for environmental accountability. So considering that silence is the last thing this country or the world needs when it comes to addressing climate change, it's essential that we ask again today's question. Is the United Nations International Court of Justice, better known as the ICJ, a safe haven for environmental accountability? The answer is no, because of jurisdiction failures. More specifically, because they have no strings attached to corporations. Second, because of the pollution influence of giants. And finally, because they can't humanize the effects of climate change. Showing that climate activists probably aren't the biggest fan of Xi Jinping. Yet unfortunately, when it comes to uniting the world together on addressing environmental issues, they can't rely on the International Court of Justice either.
Our fourth speaker will be cross-examined by our third speaker, code 5144.
Let's start with your second point. Can you give me a single example when a giant climate polluter like China, the United States, or India was on trial at the ICJ and was able to judge themselves?
It's not that they're on trial, it's that they're making the panel for the people who are judging corporations as well. And whenever the United States, China, and India still heavily favor corporations that actually pollute and cause the environmental concerns, it's clear that their influence on the panel itself is going to be swayed, ultimately making sure that the ICJ can't be a safe haven.
I'm not talking about corporations like in your first point. I'm talking about the countries themselves in your second point. You talked about how countries like China make up the litigation panel at the ICJ, but wouldn't countries like the United States be more incentivized to judge them harshly, especially given their political differences?
Well, whenever the United States still heavily relies on fossil fuels and hydrocarbons, their interests are still aligned with oil. Sure, the United States can say they are remaining impartial, but all of the promises that the United States has truly made towards climate change has been ignored. Let's just take the Paris Climate Accords. They promised that years ago, yet our carbon emissions are higher than ever, and we're still working with hydrocarbon countries, such as Venezuela, and even countries like China as well.
So in order to be a real safe haven for environmental accountability, the ICJ needs to ban all climate usage of carbon whatsoever?
That's not true. It's just whenever the United States and China has this influence to make sure that there can't necessarily be an impartial panel, it's clear that environmental accountability can't necessarily be reached.
All right, finally, let's go to your third point about humanizing the impacts of climate change. Can you give me an example of a case at the ICJ where they failed to listen to regional or local workers?
It's not that they failed to listen, it's whenever these cases are just simply ignored. More than 30% of the environmental cases don't even end up in the ICJ. And whenever people can't get their cases in the hands of this court of justice, it's clear it can't be a safe haven.
Our fifth speaker today is code 5150, who's speaking on the topic, what steps should the international community take to remedy the freshwater supply crisis? Again, what steps should the international community take to remedy the freshwater supply crisis?
Will Smith recently got really mad at his wife for trying to save the environment. But I mean, who can blame her? She was just trying to save water by showering with the neighbor. But honestly, she probably did the right thing, because the international freshwater supply crisis is clearly in a terrible situation. An article by World Vision explains on March 27th of 2023 that currently 771 million people don't have access to fresh water, and it's disproportionate across genders as well, with women having to spend nearly 200 million hours walking just to get water in the first place. And considering that the freshwater supply crisis is potent in Arizona, where an article by ProPublica explains on September 15th of 2021 that Arizona and Phoenix will be inhabitable by 2040 because of a freshwater supply crisis, it becomes more crucial than ever to ask today's question. What steps should the international community take to remedy the freshwater supply crisis? And the answer is clear. They need to support new emerging technologies that can give us water. First, through desalination plants. Second, drip irrigation systems. And third, and perhaps most importantly, wastewater treatment. Now, just like Chris Rock, reports of a freshwater supply crisis came as a slap in the face to many. However, while it seems like it's an international issue, one key solution can fix that: desalination. An article by CNBC explains on January 27th of 2023 that currently desalination is far too expensive. You spend around $2,700 per unit for desalinated water, and only around $1,500 for water from the Colorado River, where we usually get our water. But because it's so expensive, many people aren't using it. But those remedies easily can be fixed. An article by MIT explains on February 13th of 2019 that the first major issue with desalination is waste. Where does all the salt go? Well, researchers from MIT found that with enough funding, we can turn this harmful brine into sodium hydroxide, something that scientific laboratories use, which is perfect and non-harmful. Another article by MIT alleviates another concern, finding on February 14th of 2023 that desalination is expensive because of energy costs. But MIT researchers now have a novel solution that would be far less expensive because of the use of renewable energies. By funding both renewable energies and research at MIT, desalination becomes far cheaper and more accessible to everyone. However, deciphering the freshwater supply crisis is a lot like Jada and Will Smith's marriage. It's pretty hard to understand. And while not tackling the supply crisis is just as unhealthy as their relationship, it's clear to see that new technology, namely drip irrigation, can stop that. An article by University of Arizona explains on June 5th of 2023 that if we instituted drip irrigation, farmers would spend 20% less water. But they don't do that. As another article by Global Footprint Calculator explains on June 14th of 2023, one major reason that the majority of farmers don't use drip irrigation is that, again, it costs too much. Remember, farmers currently have really secure versions of irrigation: flood and furrow irrigation. And 71% of farmers reported that they currently use flood irrigation. But it costs a lot of money to switch. And that's where the international community can step in. By providing grants to farmers and allowing them to use drip irrigation free of charge, they, 1, reduce the cost of installing drip irrigation, but 2, save money in the long term because they're using less water. It's a win-win situation, and the international community needs to take note of that. Now, one of the most controversial issues in pop culture today is fast fashion, where companies are pouring in dyes and chemical waste unabatedly. One Indonesian politician who was ahead of a river that was extremely polluted said that pollution was fine because he was turning its constituents into the X-Men. But quite frankly, turning this wastewater into something more useful is the third and perhaps most important way that emerging technology can solve the freshwater crisis. Researchers at the University of Sydney explained on January 12th of 2021 that currently in the developing world, 80% of water that is untreated is left to go into our rivers and oceans. The United States has great regulatory measures, but the rest of the world doesn't, which is why the vast majority of the people with a lack of access to fresh water aren't here in the States. But a final article by World Bank explains on March 19th of 2020 that when it comes to wastewater treatment, cost is the #1 factor. Companies are just unwilling to spend that money to institute a new system, but it pays dividends later on. A factory in Potosi, Mexico, found that when they instituted a wastewater system, operational costs after that reduced by nearly 33%, paying itself back. All the international community has to do is give companies a little bit of a kickstart and some money to institute a wastewater system. The rest will pay for itself. So as we look back on today's question and ask ourselves how the international community needs to remedy the freshwater crisis, it's clear that it needs to approach using emerging technologies, whether it be desalination, drip irrigation, or perhaps most importantly, wastewater irrigation. And while Will and Jada's relationship may be both complicated and unhealthy for each other, it's clear that the international community's relation to the freshwater crisis can be the exact opposite, creating a sustainable and meaningful relationship with nature and freshwater emerging tech. Thank you.
Our fifth speaker will be